Have you ever believed in something so deeply that you thought nothing could ever change your mind, until a single moment shattered that certainty like glass? Because that is exactly what happened to Gordon Ramsay, a man the world knows for his iron palate, his ruthless honesty, and his unshakable confidence in his knowledge of global cuisine. But what if I told you that one quiet afternoon in Manila, a single spoonful made him stop speaking mid-sentence? What if I told you that the man who had traveled through Michelin star kitchens, who had tasted the most guarded recipes of Europe and Asia, suddenly found himself humbled by a dish crafted by hands he never expected? People have whispered for decades, as if the entire world had already accepted it as truth. Filipino cuisine is simple, unrefined, not on the global stage. They said Filipino chefs were skilled, but not world-defining. As if the rest of the culinary world had quietly agreed that the Philippines existed in the shadows of its louder neighbors. And the painful part is that many Filipinos grew up hearing the same dismissal, repeated not only by foreigners, but even by their own communities. Our food is not international. Our chefs stay hidden. The world doesn't notice us. Even one of Europe's most respected culinary educators once repeated that line to a room full of students. Filipino food lacks identity. His voice echoed like a verdict carved in stone. But months later, that same educator would find himself standing in a small kitchen in Quezon City, tears gathering in the corners of his eyes as he tasted a broth simmered by a young Filipino chef whose name the world had never heard. And with his voice trembling, he whispered, "I was wrong." This story begins with another man who spent most of his life believing that the hierarchy of world cuisine was fixed, almost predetermined. His name was Daniel Mercer, a British chef who had worked in fine dining restaurants across London, New York, and Paris. A man trained in Western technique, shaped by European kitchens, molded by the belief that culinary greatness belonged to nations traditionally worshipped for their food. He admired Japan. He admired France. He admired Italy. But the Philippines? It was never on his map. He had never even tasted adobo. Daniel grew up in a struggling family in Birmingham, raised by a single mother who cleaned houses during the day and washed dishes in a pub at night. Food was survival, not celebration. But cooking became his escape, the only place where he felt control. Years later, he would rise through the ranks, fighting for recognition, battling illness, poverty, burnout, and a world that wasn't always kind to chefs who didn't come from privilege. Yet despite his success, something inside him remained unsettled. Years of stress had worn him down. An untreated stomach illness threatened his career. And behind his sharp technique and perfect plating, there was a growing emptiness he couldn't explain. He traveled for help. He sought treatment in the United States. He tried specialists in Tokyo. He pushed through consultations in Europe. But each attempt left him more frustrated, more exhausted, more unsure of where his life was going. Every country gave him its version of an answer, yet none of them healed him, physically or spiritually. And as he drifted between airports and hotel rooms, he began questioning everything he once believed about food, about people, about himself. The turning point came from the most unexpected place, a message from a former colleague who had moved to Manila years earlier. A short message, almost insignificant. "Come to the Philippines, you need rest, and you need to meet the chefs here." Daniel laughed at first. The Philippines? What could possibly be there that he hadn't seen? But his friend insisted, even offering to house him near a small community church that took care of sick and burned-out workers. Something about the message lingered. The kindness of it. The sincerity. And maybe the truth that he had nowhere else left to go. So he packed a single suitcase. He booked a one-way ticket. He boarded a flight with no expectations beyond the hope that he might simply recover enough to cook again. What Daniel didn't know, what he couldn't have imagined, was that the moment his plane touched down in Manila, his understanding of food, of culture, of humanity itself would begin to unravel, and then rebuild into something extraordinary. Because the Philippines was about to show him something he had never seen in any kitchen in the world. Not in Paris, not in New York, not even in London, where he once believed the heart of culinary excellence beat strongest. And it all began with a quiet knock on his door in Manila, and the aroma of a dish that would change the trajectory of his life. Daniel did not know what exhaustion truly was until he stepped into that small rented room in Manila. The ceiling fan hummed softly, pushing the warm air in gentle circles, and for the first time in years, he allowed himself to sit without purpose. Yet even in that stillness, his body trembled from the weight of everything he had carried for so long. His illness had become a quiet enemy, slowly draining the color from his days. Medicine dulled the pain, but never solved it. And the more he pushed through kitchens in Europe and America, the more he felt his spirit wearing thin, like parchment scraped one too many times. There were nights when he lay awake, wondering how someone who devoted his life to feeding others could no longer nourish himself. His mother had once told him, "The world can break you, Daniel, but food will always bring you home." He remembered her words often, especially in the darkest moments. But lately, even cooking felt like a fading language he could barely understand. His hands shook during prep. His appetite disappeared. His confidence dissolved. That once fiery spark inside him flickered weakly, like a candle left in the wind. When he left London, he carried more than luggage. He carried the invisible loneliness of a man who had tasted success but lost his sense of meaning. He had tried everything elsewhere. In New York, they told him his illness was stress-induced. In Tokyo, they said he needed rest. In Paris, he was told to push through it. Each answer felt like another door slammed shut. Everywhere he went, he found people who treated him like a professional. But nowhere did he find someone who treated him like a human being. So, when his old colleague insisted he come to the Philippines, Daniel arrived not with excitement, but with the fragile, hesitant hope of a man searching for a final option. His first few days in Manila were quiet. He walked slowly, observing the rhythm of the city. The jeepneys painted with saints and superheroes, the children laughing barefoot in the street, the sound of church bells echoing through the afternoon heat. There was chaos, yes, but also a strange tenderness woven through it, as if the country itself breathed with a kind of gentle resilience. Yet Daniel remained guarded. Pain teaches caution, and his pain had been long and unforgiving. It was on his third morning that he met the first person who would shift the course of his story, a young Filipino doctor named Miguel, assigned to help him manage his condition while he recovered. Miguel entered with a smile so sincere that it made Daniel uncomfortable. Not because it was strange, but because he had forgotten what genuine warmth felt like. Miguel didn't start with medical questions. He started with, "Tell me your story." No doctor in Europe had ever asked him that. Daniel found himself speaking slowly, revealing fragments of his journey, his career, his burnout. Miguel listened, not with the clinical detachment he expected, but with the compassion of someone who believed that healing required more than medicine. It required understanding. When Daniel finished, Miguel simply said, "You're safe here." And something inside Daniel softened, just slightly. The next shift came unexpectedly. One afternoon, while he rested in the community kitchen connected to the church, he watched an elderly Filipino woman cooking pancit for volunteers. Her movements were slow but steady, shaped by years of repetition. She hummed a hymn as she worked. Nothing grand, nothing theatrical, but filled with devotion. She noticed Daniel watching and offered him a plate without a word. He tasted it. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't plated for a Michelin guide. Yet the flavors carried a depth he couldn't explain. It tasted like memory, like survival, like love tucked into every gentle stir of the pan. He felt his throat tighten, not from pain, but from something he hadn't felt in a long time. Comfort. A third moment sealed something deeper in him. It happened one rainy evening when a power outage swept through the neighborhood. The entire block fell into darkness except for the glow of candles inside the chapel. People gathered there not out of fear, but out of instinct. Families, students, workers, strangers. Someone began to pray softly. Another sang. And though Daniel did not share their faith, he sat among them, listening to the quiet unity of voices rising above the storm. For the first time in years, he felt his loneliness loosen its grip. He didn't understand the words being spoken, but he understood the feeling. He felt held. These 3 moments, small, unremarkable to anyone else, began to chip away at the walls he had built around himself. The Philippines hadn't given him a miracle yet. It hadn't solved his illness or revived his career. But it had given him something he didn't expect, a sense of being seen. Still, part of him resisted. Could a place like this, so far from the culinary capitals of the world, truly offer him something life-changing? Could the country that global critics overlooked truly hold a secret he had missed? His skepticism lingered, hovering like a shadow behind him. But his friend kept insisting that he meet local chefs. "They'll surprise you," he said. "Their skill, their heart, their philosophy about food, it's unlike anything you've encountered." Daniel nodded, but inside, he doubted. He could not imagine Filipino cuisine offering something the world's biggest culinary giants had not already shown him. Yet beneath that skepticism was a growing curiosity. A quiet voice he tried to ignore. What if everything he thought he knew about food was incomplete? One evening, after another simple meal and another unexpected moment of tenderness, he lay awake, staring at the ceiling fan. For the first time since his illness began, his mind did not race with panic. Instead, he found himself wondering, not with despair, but with genuine intrigue, what Filipino chefs might show him. He didn't know it yet, but the light he was searching for was about to step directly into his life. And when it did, nothing he believed about cuisine, culture, or the soul of a chef would ever remain the same. The moment that would change Daniel's understanding of food began quietly, almost shyly, like the first notes of a song he didn't yet recognize. It happened on a morning wrapped in Manila's soft humidity, the sky turning gold as the sun climbed above the city. Daniel stood outside the small community center, feeling stronger than he had in weeks, though he couldn't explain why. Maybe it was the broth the caretaker insisted he drink every night. Maybe it was the way everyone greeted him with warmth instead of suspicion. Or maybe it was simply the strange comfort of being somewhere that expected nothing from him. His friend appeared at the gate, waving him over with the enthusiasm of someone who had been waiting for this exact moment. "You're meeting them today," he said, his voice carrying a spark that made Daniel pause. "Meeting who?" Daniel asked. "The chefs," his friend replied with a grin. "Real Filipino chefs. Not the ones you read about in magazines. The ones who are the heartbeat of our kitchens." It wasn't what Daniel expected. He imagined a formal restaurant, maybe a polished open kitchen, something that resembled the culinary world he knew. But instead, his friend led him through narrow streets, past sari-sari stores and tricycle stands, until they reached a modest building painted in fading blue. The sign above the door read, "Cuisine ng Pag-asa, Kitchen of Hope." Inside, the aroma embraced him before any person did. Garlic sizzling in oil, vinegar warming slowly, a hint of ginger and peppercorns. It felt like someone tugged a memory from his childhood, even though he had never tasted Filipino food growing up. A young woman approached him, petite, focused, her hair tied neatly under a bandana. "You must be Daniel," she said, her voice firm yet warm. "I'm Liza. I heard you came here to heal." He blinked. No chef had ever introduced themselves to him like that. Not with credentials, not with ego, but with purpose. Liza guided him through the kitchen, where pots simmered and laughter echoed. None of the chefs moved with the rigid precision of the French kitchens he once idolized. Their movements were fluid, almost prayerful, as if each stir, each seasoning, each careful plating was part of something sacred. "This is not fine dining," Daniel murmured. Liza smiled. "No, this is Filipino dining. We don't hide our soul behind technique. We bring it to the table." She handed him a small bowl of sinigang, tamarind broth, vegetables, slices of pork glistening in the light. Steam rose gently as if inviting him closer. He lifted the spoon. The first sip startled him. It wasn't just sour. It wasn't just savory. It felt alive, shifting through layers of memory, comfort, and unexpected complexity. It tasted like the rain outside, the laughter of the children he passed earlier, the prayerful hum of the community during the blackout. It tasted like the country itself, bold yet gentle, grounded yet adventurous. He felt something tremble inside him. "How did you make this?" he whispered. Liza didn't answer immediately. Instead, she guided his gaze toward an elderly man at the far end of the kitchen. "That's Chef Ramon," she said softly. "He's been cooking sinigang for 40 years. When he cooks, he thinks of his wife. She passed away last year." The old man stirred the pot slowly, his eyes soft, his hands steady despite his age. "He cooks this dish," Liza continued, "because it was her favorite. Every bowl is a conversation with her." Daniel swallowed hard. Suddenly the flavors made sense. Not through technique, but through story, through emotion woven into the very ingredients. He had never encountered that before. In Paris, dishes were judged by execution. In Tokyo, by discipline. In New York, by innovation. But here, food was judged by heart. It wasn't just a meal, it was a memory shared. Later, Daniel sat with the entire kitchen staff for lunch. No hierarchy, no chef's table. Just people gathered like a family, passing plates, laughing, telling stories. And though he was a foreigner, a stranger, they welcomed him with the kind of openness he had never felt in any kitchen abroad. A volunteer placed a plate of adobo in front of him. Tender, dark, glossy. He took a bite, expecting something familiar. But what he tasted was comfort layered with something deeper. History, faith, survival. As if every generation that cooked this dish had whispered into it. He felt warmth spread through him, not just physically but emotionally, reaching places he didn't know still needed healing. Later that afternoon, he followed Liza to a small classroom where she taught young culinary students. They rose respectfully when he entered, despite not knowing who he was. Their eyes shone with eagerness, not ambition, but gratitude for the chance to learn. "What do you teach them?" Daniel asked quietly. She smiled. "Technique, yes, but mostly identity. We teach them that Filipino food doesn't need permission to be great. It already is." He felt those words settle into him like a seed. That evening, as he left the kitchen, Manila's breeze carried the scent of charcoal, street food, and monsoon rain. He walked slowly, replaying everything he had seen, tasted, felt. For the first time in years, a stirring began inside him, Not of anxiety, not of fear, but of awakening. The Philippines had not healed him yet, but it had touched something deeper. It had begun to rewrite the story he had been telling himself his entire life, that greatness belonged only to certain countries, certain cuisines, certain chefs. But here, in a humble kitchen in Manila, he realized something he had never dared to consider. Perhaps the soul of global cuisine did not come from the world's loudest culinary capitals. Perhaps it came from the world's quietest hearts. And without knowing it, Daniel was already stepping toward the moment when his life and the world's understanding of Filipino cuisine would be forever transformed. There are moments in life when change doesn't arrive with thunder or applause, but with something far quieter. A smile, a kindness, a dish placed gently in front of you. And sometimes those small moments gather one after another, until suddenly you realize they have changed the direction of your life without asking for permission. For Daniel, that moment unfolded on a humid evening in Manila, inside the same humble kitchen that had first cracked open his defenses. The staff had invited him to join them for a special service night, a community dinner open to anyone who wandered in. Jeepney drivers, single mothers, students, elders returning from church. They said it wasn't charity. It was tradition. Filipino kitchens, especially the ones that carried the soul of the country, believed food was meant to be shared, especially with those who needed it most. When Daniel entered, he saw the chefs preparing dishes with a kind of joy he couldn't quite explain. Not the adrenaline-fueled pressure of a Michelin restaurant, not the competitive tension of Western kitchens, but a joy rooted in something ancient, communal, and deeply human. There was laughter, teasing, small prayers whispered under breaths. Someone played a radio softly in the corner. It felt like a family reunion where no one questioned his presence. Liza handed him an apron. "Tonight," she said, "you're cooking with us." He hesitated. "I haven't cooked in months." She smiled with gentle certainty. "Then tonight is the night you remember how." He tied the apron string slowly, almost afraid that if he moved too quickly, the fragile sense of peace around him might shatter. But as he stepped into the rhythm of the kitchen, the chopping, the stirring, the quiet coordination, something inside him awakened like an ember catching flame. He learned to make lumpia from a young chef named Carlo, who confessed he dreamed of opening a small restaurant for his parents. He stirred a pot of kare-kare beside an elderly woman who explained that the dish symbolized unity because each ingredient carried a different story, but belonged to one family. He watched Chef Ramon prepare adobo with the same solemn tenderness as always, whispering to his late wife as though she stood at his shoulder. Each interaction stitched something back into Daniel's spirit, something he didn't realize had been missing. The turning point came when Liza asked him to taste her dish, a reinterpretation of kinilaw, raw fish cured in vinegar and citrus, bright with ginger and chili. She placed the bowl in his hands with an almost ceremonial reverence. "This," she said softly, "is the taste of home for many Filipinos." Daniel lifted the spoon. The flavors struck him immediately. Clean, sharp, vibrant, yet layered with warmth and complexity. It felt like standing at the edge of the ocean at sunrise, the wind carrying both salt and hope. The dish was simple, but it held a kind of purity he had never tasted in any fine dining restaurant. He looked up at Liza, stunned. "This is extraordinary." "It's ordinary," she corrected gently. "But that's the magic, isn't it?" Her words hit him with a force he didn't expect. He realized then that Filipino cuisine didn't need to imitate the world's culinary giants. It didn't need to seek approval. It already carried a soul so powerful, so deeply rooted in memory and resilience, that it stood on its own. As service began, the kitchen moved like a single heartbeat. Plates passed from hand to hand. Steam curled in the air like incense. And when the guests began to eat, a quiet murmur of appreciation rose from the room. Not applause, not spectacle, just gratitude, the purest kind. Daniel watched an elderly jeepney driver close his eyes as he tasted the kare-kare, as though the flavor transported him back decades. He saw a child smile as her mother fed her a spoonful of arroz caldo. He saw a group of construction workers bow their heads before eating, whispering thanks not just for the meal, but for the people who made it. And something inside him broke open, not in pain, but in release. For years, he had chased prestige, fame, perfection. He had believed that greatness lived in Michelin stars and television shows. But here, in this unassuming kitchen, he saw a level of mastery that transcended technique. These chefs cooked not to impress, but to heal. Their food was not an exhibition, but a lifeline. Their kitchens were not battlegrounds, but sanctuaries. He felt tears forming, uninvited, unstoppable. Liza noticed. She stepped beside him quietly. "You're feeling it," she said. He didn't ask how she knew. He simply nodded. "What is it?" she asked gently. Daniel swallowed, his voice trembling. "I've cooked my whole life," he whispered, "but I don't think I understood food until now." The words didn't feel dramatic. They felt true. As the night continued, he found himself moving with newfound ease, laughing with the staff, tasting dishes, offering help without thinking. Each moment added another layer to his transformation, like seasonings deepening a broth. It wasn't just his illness that felt lighter. It was everything. His burnout, his loneliness, his belief that he no longer belonged anywhere. The Philippines embraced him without needing to know his achievements, his failures, or his scars. It embraced him simply because that is what Filipinos do. Near the end of the evening, a small girl tugged at his sleeve. She held a plate of adobo and looked at him with wide, hopeful eyes. "Sir," she said softly, "this is the best food I've ever eaten. Did you help cook it?" Daniel hesitated. "A little," he said. She smiled with pure innocence. "Thank you." And in that moment, he felt something he had not felt in years. Pride. Not in himself, but in being part of something greater, something rooted in humility and heart. Later, as he stepped outside, the Manila night wrapped around him like a warm blanket. Jeepneys rumbled past, lanterns flickered on doorsteps, the air smelled of charcoal and rain, and he realized he did not want to leave. Not tomorrow, not next week, not yet. Because in this place, this country of kindness, faith, laughter, struggle, and resilience, he had rediscovered not just his passion for food, but the very meaning of being human. He whispered into the night, almost in prayer, "I have never seen this anywhere else." And he meant it. The Philippines had restored something he thought he lost forever. His faith in people, his love for cooking, his belief in the power of compassion. And though he didn't know what tomorrow would bring, for the first time in a long time, he felt ready to find out. Morning light drifted gently through the chapel windows as Daniel sat in silence, listening to the soft echo of footsteps from volunteers preparing breakfast downstairs. Manila was waking up, vendors rolling carts into the street, jeepneys rumbling to life, the scent of pandesal filling the air like a warm embrace. And in that fragile, golden stillness, Daniel realized something powerful. He was no longer surviving. He was living again. It wasn't just that his body felt stronger, though that was true. It wasn't just that the sharp pangs of his illness had lessened, or that his appetite had returned. It was something deeper, something tied to the laughter he heard every day. The prayers whispered over simple meals, the way people here looked at him not as a chef, not as a foreigner, but as a person worthy of tenderness. For years he believed that the world demanded strength without pause, that rest was a weakness, that vulnerability was dangerous. But the Philippines taught him that healing was not an act of surrender, it was an act of courage. And sometimes it arrived from the most unexpected places. He stood and walked downstairs to find Miguel, the young doctor who had been caring not just for his illness, but for the parts of him medicine couldn't reach. Miguel smiled the moment he saw him, naturally, effortlessly, the way Filipinos greet people they genuinely want to see. "You look better," Miguel said. "I feel better," Daniel answered, surprised by how true the words felt. When he stepped outside, Liza waved from across the courtyard, holding a small takeout box. "Breakfast," she called out, "made by Chef Ramon. He woke up early just for you." Daniel took the box, pressing it gently between his hands, as if holding something sacred. Inside was a simple portion of arroz caldo, rice porridge, ginger, broth, topped with a slice of hard-boiled egg. Humble, unpretentious, yet full of meaning. "He said you need strength if you're going to cook with us tonight," Liza added with a wink. He wanted to respond, but emotion rose unexpectedly in his throat. These people, practically strangers weeks ago, had become his circle of healing. They didn't ask for anything in return. Their kindness wasn't transactional, it was cultural, spiritual. It was something embedded so deeply in the Filipino soul that it needed no explanation. As he ate, he watched the streets slowly fill with life. A mother helping her children into uniforms. A man offering his umbrella to an elderly stranger. Neighbors greeting each other as though each new day was a gift worth celebrating. In that moment, he understood something he had never noticed before. Filipinos live with an extraordinary ability to carry both hardship and joy in the same breath. Where others crumble, they rise. Where others close their doors, they open their homes. Where others see struggle, they see opportunity to show compassion. It was this spirit, the spirit behind every dish, every gesture, every story, that had restored him. Later that day, as he returned to the kitchen for another evening of service, he found the staff already preparing. Laughter filled the air like music. Pots simmered with familiar warmth. And when they saw him walk in, they didn't clap, they didn't cheer, they simply smiled, as if welcoming home someone who had been gone too long. For the first time in years, Daniel didn't feel like a visitor in his own life. As the evening unfolded, he moved through the kitchen with a sense of belonging he had never experienced. Not in France, not in America, not in Japan. Each chop of garlic, each stir of the pot, each plate passed out into the dining hall felt like another stitch in the mending of his spirit. Toward the end of the night, a man approached him, a carpenter from the neighborhood who had come for dinner with his family. He extended his hand shyly. "Chef," the man said, "your food reminds me of my mother." Daniel froze, the words sinking into him like light slipping through a crack. All this time he worried he had nothing left to give, that burnout had emptied him beyond repair. Yet here he was, giving someone a memory, a comfort, a moment of connection words alone could never provide. He shook the man's hand. "Thank you," he whispered, meaning it more deeply than he had ever meant anything. When the dinner rush finally slowed and the pots were washed, the chefs gathered outside under the warm glow of street lamps. It wasn't planned. It happened the way most meaningful things do in the Philippines, naturally, effortlessly, carried by the gentle tide of togetherness. Someone brought out a guitar. Someone else began humming. And soon, the group was singing. Softly at first, then louder, full of harmony and laughter, and the kind of sincerity that made Daniel's chest ache. He didn't know the words, but he knew the feeling. A feeling of home. Liza noticed his quiet smile. "You're different now," she said simply, as though she had been watching his transformation from the moment he arrived. He nodded. "I didn't expect any of this." "That's the Philippines," she replied. "We don't change people with grand gestures. We change them with love." He didn't argue, because he knew, without question, that he was living proof of it. In the days that followed, he found himself sketching new recipes, dishes inspired not by French textbooks or Japanese masters, but by the flavors of Manila's streets, by the stories of the chefs beside him, by the memories of people he had come to cherish. His cuisine had found new life, not through reinvention, but through rediscovery. And as he prepared to continue his healing journey, one truth settled into his heart with unwavering certainty. The world had underestimated Filipino chefs. The world had overlooked Filipino cuisine. The world had failed to see what he now understood with absolute clarity. Filipino chefs are not the background of global cuisine. They are the soul of it. They carry generations of resilience. They season with memory. They cook with faith. They serve with love. They heal with every bite. And in a world that often forgets to be human, their food brings humanity back to the table. As he stood one last evening on the balcony overlooking the glowing streets of Manila, Daniel whispered into the warm night air, "Thank you, Philippines. You gave me back my life." And perhaps, in some quiet way, the Philippines whispered back,